Okay, Shavua Tov. We're actually doing a repeat psalm this morning, and I'll tell you, as we learn it, you'll see why we're repeating it. I'm learning psalms a lot, so I came across this Malbim that's at the bottom of the page in front of you, and this Malbim is an introduction to Psalm 23. Now, everybody, I have to be careful. I say most people really know Psalm 23. When I was a kid growing up in public school in Boston, in a suburb of Boston, this was read over the loudspeaker every morning. Before you pledged the flag, somebody read, Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. And so it's like, it was part of my education before I had a Jewish education. And then it stopped abruptly. I'm going to say in 62. Is it 1962 when the Supreme Court said there couldn't be prayer in separation church? It means there can't be public prayers. And so what happened in my middle school, junior high, we then were given a minute of silent meditation, and I continued reciting, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not walk, to myself, because it was like what I was used to from all those years. But so this, I really think I have no proof for this, that this is the most popular psalm. And we Jews use this psalm. It's always funny when Gentiles come to a Jewish funeral or visit a Jewish cemetery, and this psalm gets recited. Christians are always, oh, you say this too? Oh, I didn't know you said this too. Well, King David was, our king. But so we use this psalm in three ways. And at the end, we'll talk about why. Why? One is that there is a custom brought down by the Mishnah Berurah to actually, I don't do it, but it's a common custom, to recite this psalm between washing your hands and saying Hamotzi. Mishnah Berurah, who's a litvak like me, says it's a viable minhag. I'm on that team that doesn't do anything or say anything during those few seconds, but the minhag is brought down in Hasidic circles, of course, Sephardic circles, of course, Kabbalistic circles, but even the Mishnah Berurah brings it down as a minhag. The other use for the psalm is on Shabbat. It's an argument when on Shabbat. The Sephardim use it Friday night after Shmona Esrei. They recite it before Aleinu. Hasidim say it all three meals. Most of us, Misnagdim, we recited at Suda Shlishit, but it's definitely got a Shabbat element to it. And we'll talk about why in just a few minutes. And of course, the third element is death. It's used in funeral ceremonies, in Hespedim, and we'll hopefully in a few minutes get to all three of why it has this triple appearance in Jewish custom. But first, before we even do the poem, I want to do the Malbim. The Malbim. This is before, at the end of the Malbim, there's a comma, not a period. The next words in the Malbim, maybe I should have put it on the sheet. Here. Sorry. At the end of the Malbim, there's a comma because, I have plenty. I brought in extras on purpose. Because the Malbim, after that comma, maybe I should have just put it on, says, and now I start my parish. And then it comes the period. So this whole thing is his introduction, his preface, if you will, to learning this poem. And he's not interested in how this poem has been used in Jewish tradition, because he knew he was living in the middle of the 19th century. And so he knew that it was, but he doesn't talk about that at all in his introduction. He's talking about what King David himself had in mind when he was writing this amazing poem. And so he says, B'mizmor hazeh, in this poem, in this song, in this Tehillah, Charat et korato me'et heyuto ro'etzon b'midbar ad she'ala l'mlucha. That's the entire first line. It's too much, but I'll translate. Charat is an amazing word. Charat means he engraves. It's not just he's writing it. It's like he's chiseling it in stone. All about the events of his life, from being a simple shepherd until he arose to be the king of Israel. So in other words, this poem in its pshat is autobiographical for David HaMelech. This is a synopsis of David HaMelech's life, but he didn't just write it, he engraved it. You know, it's like it's engraved in his heart and his soul, right? Tchila yashkif et reshit yemei chayav. Initially, he gives us an overview of his life during eight hitboded imson bamidbar. Those times when, early in his life, when he was hitboded, alone, in seclusion, with his sheep. This is a very funny word for a non-Chassid to use. The Chassidim in the 19th century, especially Rabbi Nachman, who lived earlier, and also the Kedushas Levi, and also the Tanya, talked about hitbodedut as a goal in Judaism. Rabbi Nachman by hitbodedut meant meditation, that you would meditate in the forests, or you'd find someplace in nature to meditate. So this, he was talking about his time as a shepherd when he felt a hitbodedut. And he's going to use that word 2 more times in this paragraph, which is, again, unusual language for a non-Hasid in the 19th century. V'yidme et atzmo ketzon ro'eh al naot desha v'et Hashem keroeh hamashkiach alav be'ein chemla. And he talks about himself initially like he's a sheep. In the first 2 lines of the poem, he's a sheep. He's remembering back when he was a shepherd, but now he's looking at those days not as the shepherd, but as the sheep. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the shepherd. Okay? Hashanim ha'ela hem hayu etzlom, in the 4th line. Mivcha yemei chayav. Those were the best days of his life. I mean, I don't think most people would think of it that way, but when you read the poem, after you see this introduction, you're going to understand why the Malbim says it. He looks back at those days very fondly, and he misses that simpler life. Ba'od hitboded im kono, while he was all alone with his creator, with his possessor, with his God. So in other words, he's talking about those days when HaKadosh Baruch Hu was with him alone in the desert. When we used to go on Tiyulim in the desert is, if you do it, it's vast, but there's a sense of you are alone with nature that's different than a forest. I mean, I love forests too. I grew up in New England, and I love going, especially to New Hampshire, to these forests. I loved it, and I never was in the desert till I met Aliyah. But there's something about being in the desert, and it's like you feel the vastness, like you don't feel in a forest. In a forest, you feel enclosed. You feel, wow, and it's just you and nature, which means you and God, and that's what he's describing in the poem. Ba'od yizamer lefanav al hegyon bechvod na'im zmirot Israel. Before he had yet become the singer who's going to turn into the sweet singer of Israel, he remembers the days before, or while he was becoming the sweet singer of Israel. Ba'od lo natal yadav keter hamalucha la'afrido min hadvekut im Hashem. Before he took the crown, which separated him from his closeness, his devekut, his connection to God. Power, the throne, the crown, separated him from God. And he looked back at those days when there was no separation. There was no mechitza between him and God. And that's the way he felt with the sheep in the desert. Shechem matzanu shegam achrei molcho kara et atzmo tamid b'shem ani v'dal. And he continued to refer to himself as a poverty-stricken individual, even when he was a king. A lot of poems. We talk about, Psalm 30, L'David Hashem Ori talks about himself as being poverty-stricken. Even though, and even Psalm 18, which he wrote at the end of his life, he remembered those days of his true poverty. And he said, today when I'm rich and famous and powerful, I have another kind of poverty. And what he was missing, what he felt he's lacking, was that direct connection to Hashem, which he had when he was a shepherd. Kizman hazeh hayo hazman hamu'ushar etzlo. Those were the days of his happiness. Ubasher hayo ratzon Hashem lotzi mechayeh hitbodut lerot tzon amo. And when God took him away from this isolation, this hitbodedut, there's that word again, to become the shepherd of the sheep of his nation. So in other words, he went from a shepherd of sheep to a shepherd of humans. Okay? We're at the end of the fifth line from the bottom. Okay? Sibev sibuvim. He went around in circles. We're going to see the circles in the poem too. Okay? Because he was Sheyilkach lebeit Shaul, and the circles took him to the house of Saul. Liot menagein b'chino, first to be a musician. V'sham natam b'libo lehilachem im Goliath. V'yilashem. And then he had the second shlav, a second stage in this development. He went from a court singer to become a court hero because it came upon his heart. He was inspired to fight Goliath, and became famous. Az hala alav chemat Shaul v'yitein et bitu. Then he came into the anger of Shaul. It was really disease. I mean, we know he was, a depressed personality, and also becomes his son-in-law, right? So the relationship gets very complicated. Okay. And afterwards he chased him to kill him, right? And all of this continued until he reaches final success. The next to the last line at the bottom, and he comes to the kingdom. He becomes the kingship. He becomes the king. David. All of this was against the true will of King David. The greatest candidate for office is someone who doesn't want the office. I mean, last week they had those debates for the Democratic candidates in the United States. 24 people, that mob trying to become president of the United States. But the whole point here is the best leaders are people that don't want to be the leader. David HaMelech, Moshe Rabbeinu, okay, and General Sherman, William Tecumseh Sherman. When the Republicans wanted to make him the nominee after Grant to be the president of the United States, he definitely would have won. He was the head of the army. He was the most popular man in the country because of his exploits during the Civil War. And when he said what famous quote. He's famous for the quote, war is hell. But this is a much greater quote. He said, if nominated, I will not run. If elected, I will not serve. I do not want to be president of the United States, which of course made him the best possible candidate. Now, as Moshe Rabbeinu didn't want to be the leader of the Jews, that's why he was such a better potential leader than Korach, who wanted it badly, right? If you really want it badly, that should disqualify you from becoming the leader, But David HaMelech didn't want it. It was against his will, but Hashem wanted it for him because he knew he was best for the job. Because the greatest desire of his life, last line, hahitbodedut, was his seclusion with God, his simple, all alone time with Hashem. V'zocher tameid yarchei kodem hatovim be'einav miketem melucha, and he viewed those early days of his life as much happier than his time as king. Okay? And that's what the poem is talking about. It's David HaMelech pouring out his soul to us. And then over the years, over the centuries, we came up with other uses for this poem, which we'll get to in just a few minutes. The poem itself is really divided into two parts. It looks like three the way I did it, but I'll explain why in a minute. The first 4 verses are all the sheep metaphor. And the last 2 longer verses are describing his time as king. So that's what's really happening in the poem. But you'll see in a minute why I separated in the middle between the 2 parts of the sheep metaphor. Mizmor David, okay, it's a psalm of David. Hashem ro'i lo echsar. God is my shepherd, lo echsar. I feel no lacking. There's nothing chasir. When I feel I'm with HaKadosh Baruch Hu as my shepherd, I definitely do not feel that I'm missing, lacking anything. All of my needs are being taken care of because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the greatest shepherd. The Sfat Emet says that when you feel a sense of lacking in your life, it's because you've lost your connection to God. Things become hester, things become hidden, and you feel like things aren't going right because your sense of connection to God guiding you has been lost. It's not that you're not getting the things you need to make your life successful. It's but that what you really end up lacking is you don't feel that Hashem is your ro'eh, is your shepherd. Binot deshe yarbitzeni. Rovetz is an interesting verb. It's a verb that means to crouch. And that's the word that's used for when animals lie down. It's not a word for humans. Humans don't rovetz. I mean, I guess if you were hurt, maybe you... Yarbitzeni, the third word in the second verse. Yarbitzeni means to crouch. But it describes how animals lie down as opposed to humans, okay? So he causes me to lie down in Na'ot Desha, really nice grass. Now, HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks as a shepherd for the best, for the best dwelling place for you, the sheep. And when he guides me, okay, when he's my menahel, my director, he directs me, right, by waters. But what kind of waters? Tranquil waters, serene waters, okay? And that's very, very important because we know quite often in Jewish history, we have Mei Meriva. And so there was Meir Kahana's father, Meir Kahana Olav Shalom's father, Olav Shalom, was once in the 70s meeting someone, and the person who he was meeting was saying, you must be so happy with your son because he's big Talmid Chacham, and he's also a big political personality doing things for Jews, okay? Well, he said to him, well, you confused my sons. The parish on the Mishnah written by my son is the Mei Menachos, and he's still the Rav in the Muslim quarter. There's young Israel in the Muslim quarter, and he's still the Rav there, the brother of Rav Kahana, Nachman Kahana. So he said, oh, you've confused my 2 sons. You've confused my son, the Mei Menachos, that was his parish, with my other son, the Mei Meriva. the troublemaking son, right? The tranquil, serene son, and the troublemaking son. He says a joke, but Baruch Hashem, they had a good relationship. That's the beginning. But what happens in the next verse? It's still think of sheep. However, the verbs, I underline them. Nafshi yeshovev yancheni b'maglei tzedek. Those verbs, yeshovev and yancheni, are not animal verbs. Those are the way you treat people. So even though he's still in the shepherd-sheep metaphor, by the time you get to verse 3, the person, David HaMelech, is now a human being herded by Hashem rather than a sheep. And the verbs show it. Now, it's a big machloket what the word yeshovev means. Rashi is the most famous, and that's the one used by the King James Bible. He restoreth my soul. Okay? Some people say the word is from shovev, which doesn't mean to be restored. It means to be calm or tranquil. And so he's made my soul, my life force. I don't like to translate nefesh as soul because neshama is soul. Nefesh chaya is a life force. He makes my life force within me. He makes it yeshovev. He could be that he restores it. And by the way, that's one of the reasons we use it on Shabbat, that we feel that Shabbat restores our energy, right? It's a recharge for the week. But I like the idea more, which is the Ibn Ezra and the Radak, that he calms my soul. What we really need in life is a really, a calm soul, a calm life force. We spend too much of our life agitated, We got to, stop reading the newspapers and turn off the news, I mean, we just need some calmness in our lives. And that's what we said HaKadosh Baruch Hu provides. Yancheni is almost the same word. The root is Noach, Menucha. Okay? We say guides me, but not, it's not guides me. He calms me. He almost sedates me. In Maglei Tzedek. Maglei Tzedek literally mean just tracks. But just, I mean like righteous. Okay? Not like just tracks. Those are just tracks. No. It means righteous tracks. I don't know how much you know the desert. But if you go in the desert and you look on the slopes of the hills on the side, if you're driving on the road, on the sides, okay, you see these tracks. They're squiggly. They're never straight. They're always curvy because they're following the contour. Those are goat and sheep trails. Those are ma'agalim. And so he's describing his sites in the desert where the shepherd is leading the sheep to those places where they can find a little vegetation. And they make these tracks because one animal goes behind the other. So they end up making these curvy tracks, which are ma'agalim. But God's a perfect shepherd. His paths are always both just and correct. In other words, tzedek has a double meaning. You say something, someone says, that's tzedek, you're right. So so God always chooses the right path, but also the just path. And that reminds us of Moshe Rabbeinu, who used to make sure he took his sheep in places that didn't belong to somebody else. So the paths that HaKadosh Baruch Hu guided King David, the human sheep, okay? He brought him to places that were both the correct way to go, but also the righteous way to go, without stepping on other people's toes, without impinging on others' rights. Lema'an Shema was all lishma. It was always for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It wasn't about me. I ended up doing things that were amazing in my life, but it was never about me. You can love the policies of Trump, or you can hate the policies of Trump. But one of the things that I have to be honest bothers me, almost any question that he's asked about anything, it quickly turns his answer, it's about me. I'm not saying he's the only politician, but he doesn't make any pretense of hiding it. It's like, and it's. I don't think it's a good Musar Haskel. No matter what the question is, it's, can we talk about a policy? He says, let me tell you what I've done. No, I didn't ask what you've done. I want to know what your policy is on X, Y, but it's always about him. And I think that's true of many politicians. I'm not, this is not specifically to pick on Trump. But it's to make the point, King David wasn't like that at all. It was never about him. It was Lema'an Shema. It was always Lishma for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But I want you to know, sometimes things didn't go well. Gam ki elech begetz hamovet. Even when I went in places that were deep and dark and dangerous, lo ira ra, I was never afraid. I was never afraid of evil things happening, because the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him this sense of calm, of tranquility, of serenity, that even when he was in a deep, dark place. Now, what's a deep, dark place, guys? Okay, I have the fortunate experience to be able to go to Tekoa with some regularity. And so Tekoa is one of those places where shepherds like King David used to be. The most famous shepherd from Tekoa, of course, was Amos, the prophet, but it's not that far from Beit Lechem. You can see Beit Lechem from there. So David was there too. When you look at the trails on the sides, there are always these deep canyons. And sometimes you'd have to go down into those deep canyons to find some moisture or to find some vegetation. And it was dark and dangerous, because that's often where the predators would hide, in the dark areas. So he's describing the terrain of Midbar Yehuda. And by the way, the word probably originally was not Salmavet, it was Salmot, which just means darkness. But we made it into, maybe King David meant, of course, that double entendre, that it's this idea of the shadow of death. But it was specifically talking about the Midbar Yehuda terrain. So even when I went to dangerous places, I still was not afraid of anything bad happening. Ki ata imadi. That's for the first time where he addresses Hashem. There is no, before this, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the third person, like distant. And now it's ki ata. As a shepherd, he felt that connection, that proximity to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It was, mano adeo, right? A man with his God, right? They were just like together. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. What's the rod and the staff? And this, more than anything else, is the reason that we say this at funerals, is these two words. Shiftecha mishantecha, your rod and your staff. What's the difference between a rod and a staff? The rod is for hitting. For hitting. Spare the rod, spoil the child. Okay? The rod is for smiting, if you will, for hitting. The mishan, which is the shepherd's crook, whatever that thing is, that the bishops carry. That's when you see them today. Okay? That long stick that they would lean on, that is for giving comfort. I'm sorry? Support. So one is for smiting and one is for supporting. But both of them gave me a sense of security, of nechama, of I'm always in a good place. because I understood that even when HaKadosh Baruch Hu was punishing me, some bad things happened, it was good for me. It helped me. It was also a learning experience. That's one of the things you tell kids in school, when they get something wrong, and you say, "Oh, don't get disappointed. It's okay. If you learn from this mistake, you're going to be so much better next time." That's an important teaching method that we think of as modern, but David Melech was talking about it. And that's sometimes what the mourners have to feel, and they have to hear. That right now things seem unfair, but in some later moment, you'll get the perspective to see that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is always, even when things look bad, is always doing what ultimately is best. It's hard to see right now. So this is like, Kishem Shmevorchen ala Tov, Mevorchen ala Ra. That just like we have to praise HaKadosh Baruch Hu, bless him. For when good things happen, we have to do the same things. Chalila, when bad things happen, because it looks bad right now, but when we get the proper perspective, which David Melech was getting later in his life, and he said, even when things went not the way I wanted them, I saw it was the right thing. And so this line, to me, is the most important reason why we recite this, either at the graveside or in the chapel, or even a lot of people say it in especially Sephardim say it in the Shiva house, and then they'll say a Kaddish, but it's got this very powerful. Please.
The Goyim use this: "The Lord is my shepherd; I shall not want." Why this and all of our Tehillim from the David?
I think it's this fourth verse. I think to them this is, yea, though I walk through the shadow of the valley of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, thy comfort me. I think it's what I'm saying right now. I think is what what really motivates the Christians on this psalm too. That no matter how dark and dismal things look, I have to have the faith that my divine shepherd is going to take care of things. I don't know if they make this distinction about the difference between a rod and a staff. I'm not sure. I got to be honest. I've never heard a Christian give a drasha on it, so I don't know. But this is the line that really strikes home as well. A little bit the last verse too, but I think it's this one that really does it. Now the poem has totally changed gears. Last two verses are not David the shepherd. The last two verses are David the king. Yes, please.
I just wondered what stage in King David's life did he write this?
I don't know. There's a midrash. That he wrote this. He wrote this at the time of his troubles with Bathsheba. If I could choose, I would say he, especially after reading the Malbim, he wrote it at the end of his life. In his 60s, he lived to be 70. That would be, if you ask me, but the Midrash says he wrote it not long after becoming king.
But he also had trouble with Saul.
Yeah, no, for sure. But everybody agrees that he wrote it while he was king, but mostly because of what's going on in the next verse. That the last two verses are talking about his time as king, as opposed to the first four, which are talking about. So that's why I said the poem in the Bagadol, in the big picture, has two parts. However, the first part is truly two parts. The first one is very, very, animal focused. Me as a sheep. The second one, HaKadosh Baruch Hu remains the shepherd, but I'm a human being herded, no longer a sheep. And that's the change of the verbs, and also the fact that now he addresses HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Atah, you. Sheep doesn't do that. That now there's a true relationship that far surpasses, the sheep-shepherd relationship. There's something, they're really connected in ways that sheep and shepherd can't be. But here we get to King David, according to the Malbim, looking back nostalgically at his time as a shepherd while he is the king. And he's saying, Taroch lefanai shulchan. Set before me, arrange for me a king, a table, neged sorai. You know, a king has to be aware, or a president that, with his cabinet, or, prime minister with, but they with the other politicians, they have to be aware that a lot of the people out there are out to get them. In other words, I'm sitting at my table, and you think my table is a place of tranquility. That's not true of a king. That may be true, in a private home, okay? If you're only there with your spouse or you're all alone. But once you get the kids there there's contention, right? But he's saying, set before me this table. There's this, again, this is now sustenance. Sustenance is still coming from Hashem, but it's neged sorai. It's in the presence, there's a table, but at the table opposite me, are people who want to give me tsaris, right? Sorai, people that are out to get me. The way we look at this, let me finish the poem first. Okay, then I'll come back. I have to come back to that because a lot of people say that's why we say this at Shabbos tables. But we'll come to that. We'll come back. Dishanta b'shem and Roshi. I'm there at this table, and there's a lot of bad guys out to get me. A lot of people who want the crown that's sitting on my head, but you have not anointed my head with oil. You have saturated my head with oil. On purpose, David HaMelech does not use the term mashachta. He doesn't use the word Mashiach for anointing. It's not anointing. You saturated my head with oil. What's he saying? The oil that Shmuel Hamnavi put on my head remains there. It's always there. It's not like Shaul. Shaul was anointed, but at some point it was lost. His behavior separated him from his becoming king. So even though I'm sitting at a table, many of these people want the crown that's sitting on my head. I'm not afraid of losing it. Because Dishanta, you saturated, my head remains well-oiled, if you will, okay? If I can use that, that bad analogy of it, because I still remain in the state of secure in the fact that I am the king to the exclusion of anyone else. That's Dishanta. Kosi Rivaya, even though I've got these bad guys, there are people looking at me with daggers. I've got trouble here. I've got, people outside the kingdom that want to attack me. Ammon, Moab, Plishtim, okay? And even in the kingdom, as close as my own son want to take my crown, my cup runneth over. My cup is full. I'm filled with stuff. Now, what's interesting is the Midrash says, when he says Kosi Rivaya, he's referring to that person whose name is based on this term. And that, of course, was his great-great-grandmother, Ruth. Rivaya is Ravat, root. Resh, Vav, Tuf is from this Rivaya root. Yeah. So he's remembering the fact of his merit. Yeah. And so he's saying, I don't care who tells me that they deserve the crown. Descendants of Shaul, okay? Outsiders, Plishtim, Ammon, Moab, my own sons. I know it's mine. And I know it's mine because I still feel the oil on my head and the merit of Ruth, my great-great-grandmother.
There's something quite nice written here. Just one.
Well, please, yeah, share. This is Hirsch, guys.
Yes. It says, though Samuel did anoint me as king in consecration for my great Jewish mission, my cup, the cup of my destiny, has been full ever since. My contentment is complete. I have received the consecration of the Jewish spirit.
Oh, very nice.
Isn't that beautiful?
That is beautiful. To me, the shot's a little bit different. What it means is, to me, it means that he continues to have, the strength, the inner strength, to be the king, because he still feels two things. My anointing still to me feels it's in effect. I still feel the oil on my head. I'm still behaving like a king, following the instructions of Shmuel. Plus, I feel that I have the inner resources which I have inherited through roots.
Yes, which is wonderful. This is the Jewish spirit, which
Yeah.
she adopted.
Which she adopted.
So
Yeah,
it's-
but adding the root to it, I think is very. But I feel like I still have the juices flowing. I feel like the resources are still there. Okay, that's what it doesn't mean I'm rich. Doesn't mean I'm wealthy. That's what it means. It means I continue to have the spiritual or the strength, both physical and spiritual strength to continue on. Please.
Here it says, it translates, Kosi Rubiai, my cup overflows.
Overflows, yeah.
That it's so full that it,
Well, yeah, overflow and runneth over. I think they're giving the same. I think they mean the same thing. Runneth over and overflows. But the idea is and the root of the word, besides the meaning root, but also comes to do with the concept of fertility as well.
Well, here it says, my cup has been full ever since, which is like you're saturated.
Yeah, the two go together. In other words, I still feel that I'm the king, even though there are the bad guys around me, number one. Number two, I still feel that I have the inner resources to do this job. Ach tov v'chesed yudafuni. I spent a lot of my life running away from bad guys. I ran away from Plishtim. I ran away from Saul. I ran away from Naval. I ran away from my own son Avshalom. I spent a lot of my time in my life running away. But you know what? When I look back at my life, the thing that was really always chasing me was goodness and kindness. Goodness, according to the Midrash, means because when things went bad, went sour, I deserved it, and it was the right thing because it got me back on the right path. And chesed means when things were good, it was the kindness that helped me get through. So the goodness means it was appropriate. The chesed means I didn't deserve it. But those are the things that when I look back at my life, and that's one of the reasons I as opposed to the more famous opinion that was written toward the beginning of his kingship, I like that he wrote it at the end. And I think that's the point that the Malbim is making as well, that it was written toward the end, and I feel everything that happened for the best. That's what was chasing me. Even the bad stuff ultimately benefited me. Kol Yemei Chayai. Again, I feel more comfortable with David HaMelech is saying this at the end of his life, all the days of my life. If he said it, toward the beginning of his kingship when he was in his 40s, I don't know. It doesn't move me as much as thinking about he wrote it in his 60s.
Yes, because here also it said, once the days of my wandering on earth shall be at an end, dying to me will be nothing more than a return home, a return to the house of the Lord forever. So it's like...
Yeah, I hear what he's saying, and of course, this last line, which I haven't gotten to yet, which you're talking about, a lot of people, and this is also one of the reasons it's a funeral poem, okay, is because the feeling is that last line is talking about Olam Haba. And I dwell in the house of the Lord, la'orach yamim, forevermore, for, length of days, whatever, okay? I don't think that's pshat. I think pshat is what the Malbim said at the end. The Malbim said at the end of his introduction to the poem, even when I was sitting in the throne room in my palace in Yerushalayim in Ir David, I always felt that I was sitting in your house with you. In other words, I didn't like it. According to the Malbim, and I like what the Malbim said, I didn't like being king as much as I liked being shepherd. However, even as king, I felt I continued to have look at the first word in the last line, hitbodedut. I still felt like I had personal, close, unique time with you, Hashem. That's what he's saying. And he's not talking about Olam Haba, which is what Hirsch is hinting at, and which is the way the poem is used. He's saying, no, it's talking about toward the end of his life. He's feeling, even here in the kingship, even here in the palace, I have that same sense of being alone with you, God, just like I did in the desert.
It just reminds me that the king is supposed to have two Sifrei Torah,
Right.
and one Sefer Torah to always remind him of his connection with Hashem. So it reminds me that that is probably trying to achieve what
That mitzvah demands, yeah.
feels that he's
Yeah.
he's very
It's very, very powerful. It's very, very powerful. On the midrashic level, of course, the last line is talking about Olam Haba. But that's midrash. On the pshat level, I believe strongly with the Malbim that he's saying, even though, and you have to remember, King David in Psalm 30 says, Achashualti Meit Hashem. There's only one thing I really want in this world, and that is Shati Beit Hashem. Is the sense of being with you. In this poem, he's not saying it as a request. He's stating it as a fact. That when I sat down and I wasn't, busy fighting somebody, I really felt like a Kadosh Baruch Hu, your mamish with me. And that's the point that he's making. And la'oracham all the days, all this time, through the good times and the bad times, through the tranquil times, through the uproarious times, I always felt that I was with you alone, that I had this special relationship. Everybody should want to feel that. Everybody should feel that you have a special, unique bond to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's what David HaMelech is saying. I mean, we're not David HaMelech, so our bond may not be as important to the whole world, but it's got to be important to me. It's got to be important to me in the development of who I am. And that, of course, is what David HaMelech is saying. So we've sort of answered the questions that we started at the beginning, or at least one of them. We sort of answered the connections to death. The death connections come mostly in verse Dalid, the valley of the shadow of death, and the fact that when I look back at things that God, did both good things and bad things to me, shivtacha, rod, the bad things, and mishantacha, the more comforting, supportive things, was all, the right thing. And it's looking at life in this tranquil perspective that is supposed to be comforting for the mourners. So that, and then of course the last line, that even after you're dead, Orech Yomim, is a reference. So the Midrash says specifically, Kol Yemei Chayai Olam Hazeh, LaOrech Yomim Olam Haba. So that's what you were saying. That's the Midrash, 100%. And so we're supposed to find tremendous support and succor in that concept as well. That
almost like Shabbat. It's almost like at the end of everything, after all the hard things, the things that I've done which haven't been so wonderful and so on.
But you get a philosophic perspective on it that says it makes a beautiful picture when all the pieces of the puzzle are together. Yeah, no, I agree. So that's the connection to death. What's the connection to meals? If we go back to the minhag of that the Mishnah Berurah brings down, which is done by many Hasidim and many Sfardim, which is to recite this poem between washing your hands and saying Hamotzi. This is for me one of the least motivating ideas in the poem, but it's interesting. It comes from the Baal Shem Tov. It may precede him, but it comes from the Baal Shem Tov, who said that there are in the poem 57 words, just like Heinz. Heinz, 57 varieties. That there are in the poem 57. The Gematria 57 is the Hebrew word zan. Birchat HaMazon, Hazan etakol. Okay, nourishment. Okay, so that the poem is about nourishment. The other idea in is it that there are 227 letters in the poem, and 227 is the gematria bracha. So that's the connection to Birchat HaMazon, to washing before the meal, blessing HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the food. I mean, it also talks about not lacking, being satisfied that I have sufficient and all of that. It talks about not lacking. But anyways, according to the Baal Shem Tov, that's the reason why there is this minhag. There is this minhag to recite this poem between Netilat Yadayim and Birchat HaMotzi. No, for the Hebrew word bracha, bet resh chaf hey, is 227, which is the number of letters in Perek Chav Gimel. But I think it also talks about having sufficiency, which is also, a major thing. So what have we left? What haven't we mentioned? Shabbat. We haven't mentioned Shabbat. And I want to say two things about why we say this on Shabbat. The first one isn't so pleasant, but it's true historically. Especially for Hasidim, think, 18th, 19th century Eastern Europe, life was miserable. I mean, it's just true. The vast majority of the people were oppressed and poor, and it was. I mean, we know stories about a tiny number of wealthy people, but almost everybody, almost all the Jews in Eastern Europe were really dirt poor. And the week was miserable. And so saying Perek Chav Gimel at Suda Shlishit especially was something that was helping you get ready for the week. I'm sitting at Shalosh Shudas, there's a table set in front of me, and what's going to happen right after Havdalah? I'm going to be out there with the Goyim again. The anti-Semitic, I mean, it's just there. And there's just no avoiding it. Shabbos was really, the metaphor, the famous, and, an island in time. But we don't sense, Baruch Hashem, we don't sense it in the same way that they did. Hopefully we still create, just getting rid of all the media, okay, get rid of all my electronic. I mean, it's still a tranquil zone in our lives. I'm not minimizing that, but we don't dread the week the way they did. And so when you understand that, reciting this poem, both according to Nusach Sfard and Sfardim at the beginning of Shabbat, and even more so, our minhag saying at the end of Shabbat makes a lot of sense. Because so many times it's Motzei Shabbos, and you say, oh, is something coming up that I don't have to say Vihi Noam? At the end of Shabbos, the one. But you have to understand that for much of Jewish history, leaving Shabbos was really leaving a tiny tranquil zone in a very, very unstable existence. And so that's what saying Vihi Noam is about, and having bitachon that I can make it through the week is very special. Why? When don't we say Vihi Noam on Motzei Shabbat? When there's a yontiv in the week, because we need to say this poem because this is going to help me get through the week. That my bitachon and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is all that keeps me together until next Shabbat. But if there's got something else in the week to look forward to, Chag, wow, I don't have to express this emotion because I'm not as scared. I don't do it anymore. Maybe I should go back to it. But when I was in Efrat in yeshiva, we always sang on Motzei Shabbat, Al Tira Av Yaakov. And it's a lovely tune, Amar Hashem liYaakov, al tira liYaakov, Bachar Hashem biYaakov. It's a wonderful tune. But when you put it in perspective of what was going on in the lives of Jews before we had the Medina, up to and including the Holocaust, people were very scared on Motzi Shabbos. And so we needed songs like this and say, don't be afraid. And remember, we're addressing Yaakov, who was our patriarch of Tsaris. We're not addressing Yisrael, who was our patriarch of power. Yaakov Avinu represented both. And so it's extremely important to understand how this poem, especially reciting it at Sudash Lishit, as we used to call an NCSY, as the Shabbos ebbs, was a really powerful event in the Shabbos experience. And it's a little poem, and we do so many wonderful things with it. But I think it's nice to sit down and really think about the content and the power in the poetry of David HaMelech. I mean, it's just an amazing Tehillah poem, whatever you want to call it, that expresses so many ideas that are still so applicable to our lives and our existence. Okay, Shavua Tov to everybody. I'm going to be away. Next time we're going to meet is going to be the second Sunday in August. So we're going to be away through Tisha B'Av, and there's a possibility, I don't know yet, that the time for the share might be changed. It's up to Sam. I'll be in communication, but please pay attention to Torah Tidbits. It'll be in there. You may know before I know. But everyone should have a wonderful summer, and everyone should have a meaningful 3 weeks in Tisha B'Av. Okay, Kol Tuv.